train. So he went on the road.
So Papa was like the first guy who like drove a hardware sale route. Like before him, people took trains.
Took trains mostly. The guys before him, a generation before him. So he was the first guy to go in the car, and that kind of freed him up so he could kind of pick and choose accounts that hadn't been looked after or hadn't even been discovered. So he had some territory in the South Shore. He was going to have south of Boston. But he was the one that figured out maybe New Bedford would be good, maybe Fall River would be good. And the Cape. The Cape was taken by another guy, so he didn't have the Cape. But he went around and cultivated all these accounts on his own. So
these other guys didn't know that New Bedford and Fall River, like they didn't even bother with them?
They don't bother with them because they were too lazy for one thing. You gotta be not lazy. So
Papa just knew that Fall River and New Bedford were like a gold mine.
Were a gold mine, yeah. And it was right after World War I.
We're talking like the 20s.
The 20s, yeah. So cities like that were still doing great in textiles. After that, in the next decade, they started to slip badly, and then they went into depression. But
what did he sell down there, Dad?
He sold hardware to these small.
Like what? Like shovels, wrenches, what?
Yeah, you name it, everything. You know, paints, everything to do with building houses, and everything, things for the house. You know, all kinds of things for the house. So as cities grew and houses were built, I mean, he just grew with them.
Wow. So he.
But he was smart. I'll tell you one thing he did. This is a very good example. In 1938, he was driving home. It was Wednesday, I think. And he was driving home, and the hurricane was hitting the South Shore, hitting all of Massachusetts and New England.
Yeah.
So he was still a kid at heart, and so as he's going through Dorchester, he sees the waves really washing up like crazy.
Right.
So when he gets to Milton, our house in St. Agatha Road, he said, "You should see the waves down at Dorchester." He said, "Let's go down there and see them." So he didn't really do that because he started getting calls from the State House. Oh, that's another thing he did. Nobody was calling on the State House. You know,
that's amazing.
Yeah. So what he did is, he being a Dorchester kid, he kind of knew different guys that worked in the City Hall and the State House, and Massachusetts State House. So he started to make connections there. So he started selling for the state. So that played into things like the hurricane, because when the hurricane hit, they were unprepared for
38
hurricane. So they called him up. When he came home to tell us about the waves, he started getting calls from the State House. "Mac, would you come in here and see if you can lay out things we can sell to the state, shovels and picks, axes, things like that."
Right.
And one of the companies was the Plumb Company, Plumb. And as luck would have it, Plumb Company, which sold axes and picks and all that sort of stuff. Anybody that was going to do construction work in around Woods or wherever,
right, would
be deep into that sort of supplies. So
one second, Dad. Hey, wait a minute. Wait. Sorry about that.
This Plumb Company would happen to be running a contest on sales. Who had the most sales, you know? And it happened to coincide with that fall, like September 21st, 1938. And my father went down and he went into the State House, and he started going to warehouses and laying out materials like shovels and picks and all that sort of stuff.
Oh, hey,
and
stay up with Liza.
He stayed probably late into the evening,
She doesn't want to be out here by
2 or
herself.
3 in the morning, working there. And then he continued to work that whole next week, and coming down to places like Mattapoisett, which he bought the cottage. He bought the cottage right about that time, where the Dooleys are. There was a small bungalow there, and we had gone down to that cottage in Labor Day, which was just before the hurricane, and he wanted us to look over this house with him. And I remember going into it, and they had a little wooden statue with carved wood, and it had a black guy holding an ashtray. And so anyway, the reason I'm telling you about that is because I remember when the hurricane hit, the cottage was knocked up in the woods and it washed right through. It was only a one-story house, and it went right through the house and washed things up. But we found that little statue up in the woods, so we brought it back. Yeah. So anyway, he was making calls down to Mattapoisett. Also at the time, he started to think about. He bought that house then, even though the hurricane hit it. They gave him a reduction on the price and everything, but he said, "I'll buy it." And he was smart enough to save money too, so he had some money, not a hell of a lot, but enough to buy a cottage, a small cottage that was wrecked. And he had that pulled back. And all that spring, all his brothers who were firemen, and Eddie Flint was working at the hardware store with them, the hardware company with them. And all these guys are in their 20s. Some were married, some weren't. But Charlie Flint, there were a couple of firemen. Firemen oftentimes are very good about carpentry and stuff like that.
Right.
So all these guys worked all spring long, helped my father build the house. Well, he didn't build it. He had a guy named Manny. He was a Portuguese guy. Manny Soares. Manny Soares.
Manny Soares, yeah.
Manny Soares. And Manny Soares. What my father did is when he pulled the house back and it was just one story, he figured, I'll improve on this. What the hell, I'm building it, and I'll get the material right now for probably a good price.
So